Welcome, everybody, to Crossing the Line with Greg Heym, where each week we dig into the latest news on the economy, housing, and whatever else we saw in the papers. Today's February 26th. It actually turned out to be a nice day here, pretty sunny in New York City, and it's our 14th episode. Sorry we were off last week, but, again, that's why we film on Mondays, so we get all the good holidays off. I am, you guessed it, Greg Heym, Chief Economist at Brown Harris Stevens and author of The Line, a weekly economics blog with over 2,500 subscribers. We couldn't do this last week because I was too busy being lazy, but we had celebrated our 200th edition of The Line the week before. Hard to believe, in a little over 4 years, we've done 200 of these. I used to do them twice a week when we started, but I negotiated down to once a week. Ari, hopefully
that's enough. People can only take you once a week,
my wife would certainly be the first to agree. Special welcome to any new listeners or viewers out there. I hope you enjoy and you like and subscribe, not just this podcast, but all the great podcasts on the More Network. We always have Ray and Lena here behind the scenes. And our special guest, Ari Harkov. How are you doing today, Ari?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day out. Sunny and what is it, 51 now?
I'm not freezing.
You're not.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
As always, we're here at Studio 1873, our home, right outside my office, which is always great, with this terrific furniture, courtesy of our sponsor, the Everset.
Yeah.
Now, I believe you
we know the Everset well. We've been working with them for years. I think we brought them to BHS at some point in the past.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Got you this nice oval table here. Hope you're happy with it. We've been using them for a long time. They do great work. Always a nice balance of cost and quality. So, yeah.
Well, thank you again, the Everset. As always, we welcome any comments that you do have. CTL@bhsusa.com. And I have to give a shout out to two of my, biggest supporters in Vince Rocco and Deborah Miller, who are always sending comments, usually good ones. But I always appreciate the feedback, and it's great. And again, they don't have to be nice comments. You can send any comments to CTL@bhsusa.com, where we're always trying to be informative, edgy, concise, and entertaining all at the same time. So why don't we start with our line items? And it was really all about housing for the most part last week. Big report on existing home sales, which rose 3.1% in January. And I guess that shouldn't be such a big surprise, but let's kind of frame it a little bit. 2023 was the worst year for existing home sales since 1995. A lot of that had to do with both low supply and high rates,
sure,
which lead to high prices, which usually leads to fewer home sales. But an interesting thing happened at the end of last year after peaking towards the end of October. Mortgage rates declined over 1% for the end of the year. That's when people who closed in January probably would have been shopping or would have locked in their rate. So it's a really good sign. Also, the price fell for the seventh straight month, the median existing home sale price. The inventory of homes for sale was 3.1% higher than a year ago. So if we're doing equations, and isn't that what math and economics is all about, lower mortgage rates plus declining prices create demand. When you add more supply, you have a bonanza of sales.
Correct.
So that's exciting, but there is a concern, right? That what has happened since the end of last year, mortgage rates have ticked up.
Pretty considerably.
So you're out there and you're active in many markets. You're talking to many people. Has there been a noticeable decline, let's say, or is it because it's spring and people may have accepted this new norm that people are just realizing they have to make the decision and make a move?
I mean, I think the first thing we have to say, as we talk about obviously here, is there's the division between the U.S. housing market and the New York City market. They're not moving in perfect parallel. So I think that's the first answer. That being said, most of the buyers that I'm seeing in the marketplace today sort of made their January New Year's resolution to buy, and they're in the market. And a move of interest rates of 50, 60, 70 basis points, which is in the range of what we've seen, is not necessarily removing them from the market. You also factor in, we're still dealing with the highest percentage of cash buyers that I think I've ever seen in my career. And those folks are not as obviously influenced by where rates are.
Right.
So I think the long and the short of it is the market is in a considerably better place now than it was a couple months ago from a New York City perspective. I believe that translates nationally as well, but the national market is moving a little bit differently.
And the biggest difference between New York City and most other markets is inventory.
It's inventory.
It's lack of inventory.
Inventory,
and
but
price
also the lack of rising prices over the past 2 years. If you look at the national median housing price across the U.S., we're up something around 50% from pre-COVID till now. New York City real estate is not up 50%.
Well, the supply, that's why a lot of people always ask me, what's the number one indicator you look at, or what's the biggest data point to know what's going on? I usually say supply. Prices are what they are, but I think people forget that, average or median prices are based on what's selling. It's not a way to gauge value for individual homes, right? But inventory is the one true indicator. There's always shadow inventory, and, anybody's home could be for sale.
Sure.
But it's the best, to me, it's the best leading indicator, most reliable leading indicator we have. And, looking at it in terms of month supply based on the pace of sales, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, gives us a real picture of where things are going. And you're looking at existing home sales nationally, 3 months supply.
Right.
Here in New York, it all depends on the price point, but looking more of a neutral market, more in the 6, 7 range, which is, like you said, keeps prices in check, so they don't get too hot during the fever pitch of 21 into the first half of 22.
Sure.
Then they don't have to come down so much. And,
correct.
I think that mortgage rates obviously are not moving in the right direction so far. And again, the reason for that really is that so many of the indicators that we look at have come in hotter than expected, most notably hiring, GDP. So I think having more inventory, not just here, but on the national level, which it's still really low, but it's picked up a little bit, will help maybe keep those prices in check.
Correct.
Because a lot of people on a national level, it's not that they've been sitting on the fence. They just, there's too much competition for not enough homes, right?
Correct.
And that's how you get inflation.
That is how you get inflation.
Too many people chasing too few homes.
Too few homes.
Right.
The challenge that we run into, from an inventory perspective, is most sellers that bring their home to the market then become also a buyer.
Right.
So they bring a seller into the market and a buyer into the market. So the increase in inventory calms price rising to an extent, but not as far as people may think, because then those people become buyers and they insert more demand into the market as well.
Well, there's always that fear of missing out, and I think you need a sense of urgency to have a real active market.
Sure.
At a time when mortgage rates are rising, or there's way too much supply, people might be like, all right, I can wait, prices will be lower. But, it is tough and frustrating. So, yeah, I believe not only do people make New Year's resolutions, they pretty much have said, whatever we do, we have to buy. And if you think of some of the other markets that we deal in, like Connecticut and Florida, New Jersey, Hamptons, like those people, find me anything at this point, right? It's that hectic. We also got this morning new home sales data, and the big difference between new home sales and existing, other than one's brand new and one's not, is new home sales are counted when contracts are signed, because that's really, the value at that time. It could take a year or two to build a home. That's why here particularly in Manhattan, we strip out new development sales from a lot of the data, because you could sign that a couple of years in advance. They rose 1.5% new home sales in January, but that was less than expected. The new home sales and existing home sales are measured in something called a seasonally adjusted annual rate. That means if, we sold new homes at this rate every month, we'd have, in this case, 661,000 sales by the end of the year. They were expecting, they being those economists out there, not this economist, those economists, were expecting 680,000 homes. So it's not great news, but it's positive. And I guess this maybe didn't get the same benefit of new rates, of the lower rates towards the end of the year.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the reasons new home sales have done so well in the last 6 to 12 months is that all these builders are buying down rates with all kinds of products to prop up the pricing, but provide incentives to home buyers. So the higher the rates go, the less spread, the less money they have to play with, the harder it is to bring the rate down to a point where the home buyer is going to purchase.
Well, and when we talk about supply, 3 months supply of existing homes, 8.3 month supply of new homes. Yeah. So that's a lot of optimism on the home builders, and the confidence index has been going up a little bit, which is surprising given that rates are going up. But if they're buying down the rates enough, maybe that's not the problem. I think, we always say here in New York City that we're never building what we need. It always seems we're building luxury buildings and not more affordable homes. And, that happens on a national level to a different level. Sometimes they're building too many multifamily units and not enough single family homes. Sure. Plus, and we've talked about this before, there are hedge funds out there that are buying a lot of single-family homes. And in one case that we talked about, creating their own town, which is kind of funny. Something they used to kind of do in the 50s and stuff like that.
Made a little Truman Show, maybe.
Yeah, I was almost thinking, because I had the movie Oppenheimer in my head, they actually built a town for the people that were working on that.
Yes.
Not saying we should do that again, but it was a great movie. So to keep on our housing theme here, mortgage rates rose for the third straight week, and this was kind of a large increase to 6.9%. Depending on which rate you look at, they're by now probably crossed 7%.
They crossed 7 today, yeah.
Right. It's been, we talked about how rates were kind of up and down and sitting in a narrow range. Now it seems like they're pushed higher. So who are the culprits here? Who do we blame for these high rates? Well, the consumer price index rose more than expected in January. So did the producer price index, or the PI brothers, as I call them. Employment was almost double what we thought, the increase. GDP fourth quarter rose 3.3%, well above the 2% forecast. Now, the only thing that tempered that a little bit was the bad news on retail sales, which fell much more than expected. We'll see if that continues. But and I do think the consumer is tapped out. I think they're really hitting that point where the excess savings or the savings built up during COVID is gone. We say it a million times here, record high credit card debt, over $1.1 trillion at record high rates. They have to be at a point where they're really hurting. And that's what will slow the economy down, since consumer spending is 70% of GDP. But so far, we'll talk about this in the next segment, but so far the prospects for first quarter GDP is looking pretty good, actually. I'll reveal that in part 2 of Crossing the Line with Greg Heym, just to keep you on the hook that much longer. So I think now, do you, obviously you're hearing about the rates, and you say that a lot of people made this resolution to go on. So it's not like they're looking for a specific rate anymore like they were a couple of months ago.
No, I mean, I think it's some people kind of have that New Year's resolution, I'm going to buy in 24. Some people have this sense of, okay, it's an election year. The second half of the year is going to be more challenging to buy in, so I'm going to focus on the first year. Some people are of the sort of, I've decided I'm going to buy, and the rate environment just is what it is, and whether it's 6.5 or 7.1, it's sort of in the same zone, and it's just time to kind of make a move. You put all them together in a bucket with people who've been kind of waiting for a while, and I think you have a perfect storm of increased demand. And when demand increases and supply remains relatively constant, the market picks up. Right. And that's what we've seen.
Well, that is, I guess this is a case where we're still hoping for a slowing economy, which seems like we're rooting against our own team. Yes. Like we kind of bet the other team, or we bet the spread, but we do. The only way rates are going to come down significantly is if the economy slows significantly, and consumer spending is 1 month, the retail sales. But we also will get 2 important bits of economic data. So we got to get this show out, Ray, quickly before the data changes. There'll be the second reading on GDP this week, and the cooler older cousin of the PI brothers, core PCE, comes out. So that'll be important. It doesn't seem to face stocks. The Dow closed at a record. on Friday, and we've seen the S&P 500 hit records. So, we used to have Alfred E. Newman behind me. What me worry? What have we got to worry about, Ari?
With AI, you have nothing to worry about anymore.
Well,
NVIDIA is going to become its own country at this point.
Well, maybe we can get an AI Greg to do this so I can take Mondays off.
There you go.
That'd be
That'll
nice.
There you go.
But the problem is, as a kid, we used to watch Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if you ever watched it, which is kind of a ripoff of Star Wars. But the whole premise was that the humans built robots to do the things they don't want to do. The robots wind up enslaving the humans and taking over the world. They did a really cool reboot of this about 20 years ago on the Sci-Fi Network. So I keep making that comparison.
And now we're doing the real life version of it, I think.
I don't know.
That's a different podcast. It's okay.
Hey, yeah, one's enough for me to do, but I'll have to charge double if we do another podcast. Hopefully, people are enjoying this one. So we'll stick with this. Again, thanks for the support that we've gotten. To end on a little bit of I called it a hard to swallow note, food is now accounting for the highest percentage of disposable income spending since 1991. And we talk about why consumers, a lot of them are pessimistic about the economy at a time when the unemployment rate is so low, jobs are plentiful, stocks are record prices. And, it goes down to kitchen table issues. There's no bigger kitchen table issue than the price of food, right?
That's it. And we talked about it last time, the difference between disinflation and deflation, and that's the key. So even if the rate of growth is slowing, the growth is still increasing. And we've seen, I talk about this anecdotally with friends and coworkers. The cost to do anything, to pay for a service, to buy a good, to buy food, whatever, has gone up so dramatically in the last couple of years. As you said, I think the consumer's getting to the point where they're just tapped out. Right.
And, the biggest needs anybody has are food and shelter. Mm-hmm. And, again, the housing costs are driving 2/3 of the CPI number, right? And then you add, it's funny, if you look at the CPI data for restaurant prices over the last year, it's up 5.1%. Now, looking at people might go, it seems like a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But, in a lot of places now they're tacking on a credit card surcharge. So that's kind of added a couple of percent to that. And it's hard. Then there's this idea of shrinkflation where you're buying the same goods, but you might be getting less of it.
Yep.
So there's a lot of different, people have heard more references to inflation than they probably ever wanted to hear in their life. Core, super core inflation, disinflation. It's almost like we're making up a new word a week. Sorry about that. But, as much as we want to, high five each other that the rate of inflation or disinflation, right, has really, we were looking at 9% year-over-year increases. Now we're seeing, depending on which one you look at, about 3% or so, 3.5% if you look at core inflation. But the biggest problem is that core inflation is still running hotter than the overall number because energy prices are coming down. Energy prices like food are not in the core number because they tend to be very volatile, and core inflation takes longer to come down. Housing prices don't come down like that, right?
No, they don't.
And so I think that's the frustration that the American consumer has. Well, at this point, I'm happy to say, and I'm going to do this like every week, that we have to take a break for a message from our sponsor, the Everset.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Well, we're back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us, and thanks again to Everset for supporting the show. So now we have the lineup. Again, we got to start talking about economists because that's what gets ratings, right? Everybody loves to hear what economists are thinking. Thanks. Ray likes to know what I'm thinking.
Yeah, one person clapping at least.
50% of the people in here are clapping. That's not great. I have to bring my mother next time.
Then the percentage goes down if you do that.
No, it's funny. I've been an economist for 32 years, and my mother still has no idea what I do.
Tell her you do podcasts.
Well, then what's a podcast? And then she watches the show, watches the YouTube of it. And after she's done criticizing like the shirt I had on and, that I didn't smile enough, then she starts asking questions like, what's disinflation? I'm like, love you, Mom. So Reuters did a survey of economists because everybody wants to know what's on their mind. And the majority of them think that the Fed will start to cut rates in June. Now, we had mocked economists that were calling for March rate cuts. And we said all along, right, that it's just the market's trying to bully the Fed.
Sure.
It's like set that expectation, and then everybody's going to believe it. And then if you don't do it, you're going to have a stock market give back. Now, that didn't happen. But, what do you think? Do you I've said it's not to the second half of the year. June's close to the second half of the year. I don't see it happening in June, but do you have any sense of this?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like Jay Powell is digging his heels in. I don't know. June sounds on the optimistic side to me. Feels like second half of the year is like third quarter, maybe.
I would say not. I wouldn't use digging his heels in. I would say doing his job.
Well, doing his job, fine, but digging his heels in against premature rate cuts. Let's call it that.
Right, and this is the mindset he should have had preventing inflation.
Sure.
He should have said, "I don't care that."
The markets are.
We have to do this, or inflation is already starting to rise. We know we have more money because we printed 40% more of it and gave it to people, and we knew we had supply issues. Now he's finally, focusing on what he should be focusing on, and progress has been made. There's no question. There's a good chance we get that soft landing. And I think it's an accident because the Fed's really almost never been able to pull it off. But here's the thing that we talk about. The economy doesn't need rate cuts. It doesn't. It's not going to change what ails the economy, which is, on the housing side, a lack of supply and high mortgage rates. Cutting the overnight lending rate that banks don't even use anymore is not going to bring mortgage rates down, right? No. In fact, the opposite could happen if people thought he was being irresponsible. Because messing around with short-term rates too much could influence long-term rates down the road.
No, you need the 10-year Treasury to come down, and for the 10-year Treasury to come down, you need the economy to weaken.
Right, and again, we're not rooting for it too, but it is happening in a certain sense, or it looks like the buildup is starting. It's funny because we keep hearing so much talk about layoffs every week. There's 8 million layoffs, and then you look at initial claims for unemployment, they keep going down.
Yeah, well, those people are getting rehired right away. And they're in very specific sectors.
Right. I mean, tech is what we keep hearing all the time. Tech. And right. They're either getting high severance packages or finding jobs quick enough.
Yep.
We mentioned, I teased that we were going to say what the forecast is for first quarter GDP growth. The Atlanta Fed has something called GDP Now, where they look at a lot of indicators to determine it. And this number changes a lot. And February's not even over yet. It's really only based on January data. They're looking at a 2.9% rate of growth in GDP in the first quarter, which would be just below 3.3%. Now, again, that could be revised on Wednesday when the second reading of GDP comes out. Economists revise data because in a rush to get it out in a timely manner, a lot of reports, like the jobs reports, usually comes out the first Friday of the month.
Sure.
That's not going to be true this week because it's actually the first. They usually don't do it then. So it'll be next week. But when you rush to release things, a lot of data comes in after the fact. We do the same thing with market reports. It's like it's got to come out the first business day after the quarter ends. Okay, well then we're going to revise it with later data.
Sure.
And again, we get core PCE this week, and that's our best reading on inflation. That's the one that the Fed is looking for. And again, the big difference is between that and CPI. CPI just looks at prices, doesn't account for spending, right? Whereas core PCE looks at how much money people are spending. If they're buying steak becomes too expensive and they buy chicken, things like that. We keep using that. We got to come up with a better one as economists, but that's the one we're using.
They wanted a 3-bedroom house, they got a 2-bedroom.
Well, something like that. Well, and they paid more for it.
And they paid more for the 2-bedroom than they wanted to.
So we'll see about these rate cuts. I mean, it's going to be the talk, but the one thing that we're saying here is it's not bad news if we get them. The stock market will love it, but it's not going to solve the mortgage rate crisis, and it's not going to help consumer spending necessarily. There's a more direct relationship between what the Fed does to that short-term rate and credit card rate and revolving lines of credit, so it could help a little bit. But again, consumers have already borrowed so much money that it's hard to know. All right, so this article I thought was interesting. It's one of these cases of theory without any empirical evidence. When I saw the headline, I said we got to talk to Ari about this. Basically, in quotes, the headline was, "If your parents are homeowners, you're more likely to be a homeowner." And this was an interview a professor named Susan Wachter, who's a professor at Wharton, had mentioned. Now, I looked at the article pretty thoroughly, and I didn't see any empirical data to back this up. But I do think, I take a lot of, when I make decisions, I think about what my parents do and,
Sure.
or what they did, and do I think that was the right thing to do?
Or just how about the simple correlation that people who are more affluent tend to be more likely to be homeowners, and people who are more likely to be homeowners will therefore have children who are more affluent, and so on and so forth.
Well, they do mention that homeowner parents are more likely to help young adult children, apparently not old adult children, but young adult children, right? With down payments, help them save money and even show them how to achieve home ownership. Now, I, as an economist with an MBA, I feel a deep responsibility to teach my son about, he's only 16, so we'll deal with a car first and then maybe a home at a later point, and college in between. But I've tried to teach him the value of money. But then I think back at 16-year-old Greg, who was working in a Sam Goody in Green Acres Mall in Long Island, not coming home with a paycheck because CDs had just come out. But now, it's hard. One of the things that I'm obsessed with, this FIRE movement, financially independent, retire early, not because I don't want to keep doing the podcast or working here, but anything new, any new kind of thought, plus, knowledge that I can give my son that I didn't have. But, one of the things I do is my son gets a generous allowance, but I use a fining method when he doesn't do a chore or he misses the school bus or something like that. I'm trying to teach him that, if you don't show up to work, there's consequences.
You give him like a little parking ticket on his door? Yeah.
No, he just knows. And my mother screams at me about this. I'm going to fine him if he doesn't eat all his vegetables. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy. Hopefully my mother's dialing the police right now. And
you got a parenting podcast in your future, Greg?
No, I do not.
You're good to go.
Well, don't say no. You never know. My son may go on to do great things, and then I'll be bragging. So, I mean, do you? I know you mentioned that successful people will pass that on and have the money to do
absolutely.
that. Do you think, there's been a lot of talk since the financial crisis that people don't put the same amount of emphasis on home ownership? Like when they saw that housing can go bust after, this great run up and everything. Do you find that to be true?
No, I think that's nonsense. I think everybody has forgotten that. I don't think most people can remember what they had for lunch 2 days ago. I don't think they remember what happened during the financial crisis. I think the desire for homeownership is really high, as we've seen by the demand across the U.S. over the past couple of years. And I think during COVID, it's actually gone up because people are more focused on their homes, the space that they spend more time in.
Right.
So I don't think there's a decline in the desire to own a home. I do think there is an increase in quality of life in the way we spend our time. What did you call it? FIRE? I'm going to use that fancy acronym.
FIRE, yeah. Financially independent,
I never heard this
retire early.
before.
It was a whole movement, and
I think it's definitely happening. I never heard it called FIRE, but people are absolutely ascribing to it.
For my generation, I only speak for myself, we're probably the Gen Xers are probably the first generation where the vast majority of people don't own pensions, right?
Sure.
So there's a good side to that. I don't have to work till I'm 65 if I don't want to, or if I somehow find a way to do that. But I think, things change. The ways of thinking change.
Sure.
Home ownership, again, roughly 2/3 of Americans own a home. And I agree that people wanted to get out of dense living, out of apartment buildings after COVID too, and low rates right afterwards certainly, is the perfect combination for a runaway housing market. Now we're seeing sort of the hangover from that. But people's attitudes do change. But at the end of the day, if you grew up in a home and you like that, there's a lot of things about my childhood I liked that I try to, pass on to my son or do with him.
Sure. And I think the availability of social media and the ability to kind of see behind the curtain of the way that other people live is driving a desire towards lifestyle-based decisions around wealth as opposed to material-based decisions around wealth, if that makes sense. So your fire example is great because you're, 45-year-old or 55-year-old or whomever, instead of, looking at a sports car, maybe is looking at retiring early or taking, a certain vacation or having a second home or something that they can experience rather than touch and feel.
Well, it's not just younger people, because one of the things that had kept retail sales going was that baby boomers were spending. Like baby boomers had changed their attitude. And it's like, okay, COVID, is still there, but it's not as bad as it was. I'm going to go out and live.
Yep.
And boy, are they living, because they were the ones with the cash to keep the economy going. I have a little bit of a guitar buying problem. That's what I do when I actually, I'm expecting one to come tomorrow.
How many guitars do you have, Greg?
I can't
Can we admit
count
this
that
on
up.
air?
I think this might be 14. But
14?
now that my son is playing, you have to cut that in half because he'll get half. It's almost like a divorce. He'll get half the guitars. No, some of them, like, I've never gotten. Well, I've sold a guitar or two or traded them in, but I have my first two real guitars. I have an Ibanez Roadster 2 that is 40 years old that still plays. And that's a problem when you can't let go of things, or it's so old you can't trade it in. But
so you need a bigger house then. You need a bedroom for your guitar.
I used to have a room for I used to have two rooms for that, and then my son was born, and then my parents moved in. So it's fine. I just have a rack right by the bed where I can just grab them in the morning, and I've made it so my wife doesn't trip over. Well, on her side, that's where the amps go.
There you go.
The guitars are on my side. You have to keep away from the baseboard heating too, because that can warp them. All right, so one final thing, and we'll do this quickly. This Old House. Did you ever watch that show when you were younger, Bob Vila?
Yeah, a little bit.
So they looked at which cities, which states have what they call the deepest roots, or where do people stay long in their home. Mm-hmm. And the number one state of people that the highest percentage of people that have been in their homes 24 years or more, Hawaii. Maybe not surprising. Who would want to leave, right? But then they could always buy another home in Hawaii. Number two, New York. So that's interesting. But the shortest terms, Arizona, Nevada, and Florida. Now, first I'm thinking, well, they couldn't stand the heat, so they got out of the kitchen. But it's about the demographics more, right?
Sure.
That we have older people. A lot of people go to Arizona for the dry climate. If you have arthritis, things like that, it's very good. And we know same thing with Nevada and Florida is where so many people go to retire these days. Do you think about this? Does that matter? It's funny, you look at these things.
Keeps me up at night, Greg.
No, but you look at it and you go, well, that's kind of interesting. Like maybe that could be. And by the way, if you're wondering, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the highest percentage of people in their homes 24 years or more of any metro area. It's funny, a lot of these are in Pennsylvania. Number 1, number 3, number 6, all in Pennsylvania. Altoona being one of them. So Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. So maybe it's the Yankee minor league team there is keeping them. So anyway, we try to bring out these irreverent things because we're talking about such serious things here, right, all the time. And so just to sum up, how's the spring market so far? It feels like spring a little bit now.
Feels like spring outside. I mean, the spring market's good. We're just putting the polishing touches on our next team newsletter, talking about how the market is really picking up. I mean, it really has turned a corner. We're seeing more bidding wars. We're seeing more improved buyer sentiment, sort of mentality. We're seeing higher open house traffic. We're seeing a significant and perceptible shift from where we were at the end of last quarter of last year. So it's definitely picked up. It's not 21. It's not the first half of 22, but it is a perceptible from where it was. That's
good. And it does seem, and there's been a on this, that they accepted the new reality, so
Correct.
to speak, right? And at 3% mortgage rates gone forever necessarily, but a long time.
Maybe, you never know.
I mean, it took how many years to arrive? We talked about the 2% at first of the line. The first line that I wrote, I forget the exact, I think it was in June of 2020. The featured headline was mortgage rates had dipped below 3% for the first time.
For 2020, that is, I'll butcher, you probably remember, 40 years something of rates that 5%.
Well, a housing crisis, that happened in the late 2000s.
Yeah.
Right before the crash, 2006, 2007, were 1%.
Correct.
I know that because that's my house. Now, I've got a bunch of times and got that rate more than half.
Sure.
But I think people have to realize that, and this is something that bankers would point out, yes, mortgage rates are higher, but you're also getting a lot more on your savings too. So think about that spread. Obviously, we borrow a lot more than we put in the bank typically. But, it may take time, but wages are rising faster than prices right now. That's good and bad. It's good, but it can also help keep inflation around longer.
Sure.
More money chasing not enough goods, perhaps.
Yep.
But I want to thank you, Ari, for coming on the show. You always have a great take on these things. We'll have you on again soon. Hopefully, we'll have more good news to report. And again, we have a lot of big economic data points coming out this week, which we will talk about on next week's line. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to like and subscribe all the great podcasts on the More Network.